and you have it clogging up your cupboards.
Yeah.
You get nervous, it'll get ruined, and then what will happen is you won't be able to take it back. Wow, we're thinning out.
Hmm?
We're really thinning out.
People run away.
I don't know.
Don't know how you break.
Celebrate New Year's Day. And you have it clogging up your cupboards.
Yeah.
No. Best, I was in tier 2.
Where were you? Which part of the
That's
country?
your brother that
As
done
a lady, did you really took kids to the zoo? When was the last time you took kids to the zoo?
Which part of the lakes?
I was on the, I think it's South Lakes, literally on the coast. Right next to a place called Millam.
Oh, I know somebody goes there.
Yeah.
Charlie Rosenberg. No?
There's a zoo, a walk, waterfalls.
All we got was
How far is it from Manchester? How far is it from Manchester?
Christmas tree.
An hour and a half.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
100 miles.
Christmas
It
tree.
was like, oh, yeah.
Oh dear.
Right, a lot to do. Let's get going. Tomorrow's shiur is going to be when in the Kiddush room.
Yeah.
Time check is going.
8 o'clock, right? Am I right? 8 o'clock shachris?
Shachris is 8 o'clock on 9:40.
Because of bank holiday.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Evening.
The band Benjamin is sweet.
You're late. Tanu Rabbanon. Good evening, everyone. Tanu Rabbanon. We all know that the mayor, Meme Pishlan, used to have a lechaim on New Year's Day. Oh, it's so nice to see you. Why did he have a lechaim? So if we didn't get through the Yom Adin on Rosh Hashanah, now Baruch Hu sees how they're going to behave on their New Year's and how we behave New Year's. So then he says, okay, in contrast.
You said this year, they now have a chance, can't celebrate properly.
This year I have a chance, can't celebrate it, right?
I'll find a way.
Mem Amud Aleph, the first wide line. Tanu Rabbanon, in Loisisin Se'urin B'Pesach. If you want to get very good flour, what you have to do is you have to soak and clean the grain. In the process of soaking and cleaning and washing the grain, what might happen? Might make it chametz. There's a question: can you clean the grain? So the Beis says you're not allowed to rim losses. If you did, then they spackle. If they split open, that means they cracked open asuros. Lo dispaku mutarois. Abiyos ema. Sheiron bechimer sechimer simson. The vinegar contracts. Second hour to the third white line of the Memo Dalef. That means like this. We're going to see this again. It's quite complicated. Vinegar has a double-edged sword to the power of chametz. It can make things chametz quicker because it's like a sharp ingredient, and it can stop it making chametz. Says Rabbi Yossi, if you've got grain which has not yet become chametz but it's wet, put it in vinegar and it will contract it, and it will not become chametz. Omar Shmuel in halacha Rabbi Yossi, we don't pass on like Rabbi Yossi, it doesn't help. Omar B'chisam Amar Opel and Ispakum Mamash doesn't mean literally split open. That means if you've got grain which you've put next to wine, the smell of wine would make it split open. That means it's literally on the verge of opening up. So that's what the chametz. The Shmuel Amar Ispakum Mamash, the only chametz if they're literally open. Omar Shmuel Uvda Bedud Be'Ba'Choshu Ispakum Mamash. He came to a village which was called Bei Bar Choshu, the village of Bar Choshu. And he said that since they hadn't literally split open, it's okay. If you read books like Voices in the Silence, what they used to do is they used to get bags of grain, and they would check grain by grain to make sure that it wasn't chametz. How could you check for grains chametz or not? So what happens is, if you ever had, I don't know, I don't see it in the shop so much, puffed wheat. Do you still get it? What's it? Sugar puffs. Oh, my childhood, that was one of the main cereals. What? Anyway, sugar puffs. What happens is when it puffs, it gets bigger than its chametz. But when it's not puffed, it's not chametz. Okay. Says the Gemara, Omar Rabba, Baal Nefesh. A person who's got Yiras Shamayim, Lo Liltos, will not soak his grain. It's very interesting. A lot of different explanations. What does it mean, Baal Nefesh? What's Baal Nefesh? How does Baal Nefesh mean inside? So one explanation is that Baal Nefesh is somebody who's worried about his soul. Baal Nefesh. Somebody you should pass around to everybody for the take. You want something? No? And afterwards, you can send the bill for the dentists to who? You're right.
I've got commission whenever I send someone.
Again, Baal Nefesh, the words Baal Nefesh, by the way, is brought down halacha many times. The word Baal Nefesh, we use nowadays at Tzadi, Godol Adur, Yirashke Bahag, Admor, Chassid Shalem. You want to call?
It was used a lot. The Eruv, yeah.
Oh, very good, you're right. When the Eruv came out, but I saw the letter from Rav Shikaf, and he starts off something about Baal Nefesh, shouldn't use the Eruv. Good. Oh, so what's Baal Nefesh mean? So one pshat is Baal Nefesh, somebody who's worried about his neshama, he cares about his neshama. Another pshat is Baal Nefesh, somebody, Nefesh means a desire, Meshes Nafshchem, if you desire to help me bury soul, so Baal Nefesh, somebody who can control his desire. The Aruch says the Beis pshat is Baal Nefesh, somebody who's not fussy, because Rabba holds that you're not allowed to rinse the grain. If you don't rinse the grain, it'll be dirty. Says Rabbi, if you're Baal Nefesh, lo yiltis. So Baal Nefesh, the whole world is not allowed to wipe. So Tanya, we learned in the Beis saying, listen, for Pesach, you're not allowed to wash barley on Pesach. Even wheat, which is more compact and less likely to become chomas, even that you're not allowed to soak. So according to this, the Beis says that barley not allowed to soak, because it says wheat you're not allowed to soak. Oh, Rav Nachman, man, Abba, who would listen to Abba? Abba means father, it's a term of respect to Rabba. Ochel Namadu Fush is going to eat dirty bread. If you don't wash the grain, you'll end up with dirty grain. We're up to about 15 lines from the top at the dot for Rov Omar. Let's summarize very briefly because there's going to be a lot of shit that's hard to memorize. We've got Beis that says you're not allowed to soak barley. Rabba says you're not allowed to soak wheat. Rav Nachman says you are allowed to soak wheat. Even Rabba says you're not allowed to, says it's only a chumrah, but whatever you can. But Rav Omar also you're always, nobody's allowed to soak grain. Why? Says well, so Beis says barley you're not allowed to, but wheat you're allowed to. It says well, since it's got a groove inside it. If you ever look at a kernel of wheat, it's got a small groove. So when you soak it, the water gets trapped in the groove. But beside the sheep, the grain of barley is smooth. You might have thought that it's okay. That is forbidden. So according to, again, a third shitta, the Beis says not barley. Rabba says not wheat if you want to be machmir. But Nachman says you're allowed to wash even wheat. Rabba says you're not allowed to wash not wheat, not barley. I have to point out, Shulchan Aruch, he says that nowadays we don't wash our wheat at all because we are machmir not to rinse our wheat. I have to tell you a very interesting thing. I saw this in Vyashib, this written a couple of years ago. Last year, there's a lot of people on machmir not to sell chametz. It was the first time who doesn't sell chametz, so he hasn't sold chametz for 40 years, older person. Well, they're upset. He said last year his wife came to him and said, I want to sell chametz this year. Why? Because if you remember last year, there was such a thing called COVID, and the shops were all quite out of stock. So he said, if I don't buy flour before Pesach, what? That's a big bad bag. So he wanted to buy flour. Now, so he tried to find out what's the halacha of buying flour.
Flour's okay.
Oh, why would flour's not chametz? What is the problem with flour?
Come into contact with water.
What is the problem with flour? The Mechaber says because they wash the grain before they grind it, which is mamish our gemor. Which is mamish our gemor. We'll see in a minute more about that. All flour today is washed before grinding. That is why many people don't sell flour. It says of Eliashib, was written a few years ago, that even though the Mechaber says you're not allowed to wash grain against our gemor. Why against our gemor? Not against our gemor. To be more machmir our gemor, that's only regarding eating the flour. But selling flour, says of Eliashib, is okay. Why is it okay? Because our gemor Bemis says you're allowed to wash the grain. So you're going to be machmir not to sell something which the gemor did. The gemor is you're allowed to actually even eat. So that's what Eliashib. Yes. He wrote it before this whole, really, it was lifted about 10 years.
Last year they said you're allowed to buy and sell it.
You have to answer. Yeah, that's right. So this person went and bought and sold.
Can you explain this? We should ask people how they come to the shop after they want a piece of flour. But they'll take the
again
off the shelf, which is badai chametz, and they'll take that no problem.
I don't understand. I've not heard of that. Okay. You know, one's a chumrah, one's a din. When people are more makbid about chumras and din. Says the Gemara, Hodom al Rava then changed his mind. Mutter lil twist. Before he said you're not allowed to, now he says you're allowed to. The Tanya Yotzim pas lekir v'adoy, you're allowed to yotzi your matzah with clean flour, and also flour which is made out of bran. It's impossible to have clean flour unless you washed it. So it must be that you're allowed to wash. What's the general rule? We only had 1,000 times. How do you make something tummy? Very good. Now, people in the village were simple and they didn't wash the grain. People in the towns were more sophisticated, right? You go to London town, you go to Buckingham Palace, they have a slightly higher dress, the dress slightly thing. So if you buy flour from a town, can it become tummy? No. Yes. You said before, because they wash it. But if you buy flour from a village, it can't become tummy. Why can't it become tummy? Because they didn't wash it. Obviously, in the village, they don't rinse it. Nevertheless, it's called fine flour. So you see, you can get fine flour without washing it. We're talking about flour, not fine flour. Boss is enough. After a Papa left, I said to myself, I should ask much better questions. I'm not allowed to rinse the menachos, because let's remember that the menachos were also made out of matzah. So you didn't rinse the grain of the menachos. And it's called solas. So you see that you can have fine flour without rinsing. So Rava first said you're not allowed to rinse, because he said that if you do, you might come chametz. Then Rava changed mind and said you're allowed to, because otherwise you can't have fine flour. Rava changed mind the third time. He said, mitzvah liltis, you should rinse your flour. Why? A very interesting svot. There's a mitzvah to guard the matzahs. Matzah shmor, like you pointed out before. Now he said, Rava, if you're not going to rinse the grain, what are you guarding? The whole purpose of guarding is when there's a chashash chametz. If you haven't rinsed the grain, where's the chashash chametz? Says the Gemara, maybe you should guard it after you've added the flour and water together and guard it from the kneading time onwards. So Shimu Delisha Lav Shimu, that's not considered guarding. If you see a goy making a dough, you're allowed to use it for Pesach. You're allowed to use, you have to use shmor matzah for the mitzvah, but you can use a goy's matzah for your Seder night, as long as you eat one kazayas of matzah. Why? Because a goy's intention doesn't make it shmor. So you see, if a goy makes a dough, it's okay. Now, matzah b'achroina and b'shein, you can only use it at the big end, but not for the beginning. You can't use it for your what's the word for it? You can't use a goy matzah for your mitzvah kazayas. My time should do shimon. Why can't you say stuff like this? The goy made the dough. When I bake it, I'll do the shmir. Rava says like it's a complicated cheshbon. If you go to a goy, you see making a dough, can you bake it the shem mitzvah and biyotza? No. Why? Because you need to do shmir before the time of baking. So if you need to do shmir before the time of baking, Rava jumps to the other extreme that you have to do shmir mishas ktsira. Now, why would you have to do shmir mishas ktsira? Anyway, it's not going to get chametz because it's not got any flour. It's not going to, it's never got wet. Elamai, since there's a mitzvah to rinse it, and therefore it's going to get wet. That's why you've got a mitzvah to do shimur. Says Yomi. Maybe the shimur over here was the actual kneading time. There are 3 stages of shimur. Shimur at the time of the harvesting, shimur at the time of the kneading, shimur at the time of the baking. Rava said it can't be the time of baking shimur is good enough. Why? Because then why can't you use a goy's dough? And it must be shimur from the time of harvesting. Says, well, no. Maybe the shimur which we required is the time of the kneading and the time of the baking, but not all the way from Katsira. Maybe the guarding from Nisha is good enough. Rava never changed his mind. He said to the people when they would turn over the bundles of grain, when you turn it over, remember, now as a child, we used to buy Rakuzin's matzahs. And there were 2 color boxes. Anybody remember the 2 color boxes?
Red and blue.
They still do it? I haven't seen it.
No, they do a shmura and a non.
Do they still do a shmur and a non-shmur? I haven't seen it.
Silver
They
boxes.
do.
Mind you, when I was a child, they did red and blue.
No.
No, they don't. I haven't seen it. No, matzahs. And I remember I would have to go pick it up every year. Anyway, and what happened was my father did not let us eat shmur matzah until we were 13. No, because it's cheaper than non-shmur.
Oh, it's a cost saving. It's not a full thing. Not a full exercise.
That's right. My childhood was red and blue. Red was shmur, blue wasn't. Now they have red shmur, blue not. Lemaisa, he never let us have shmur matzah until we were 13. Much to my disappointment. Only when we were 13, because much more expensive. It was £2 a box more. Now what I know, because it actually was a lot of viewers. What?
That's a real cost saving exercise.
Lemaisa, is not so. Lemaisa, you see from Rava. Rava told them that from the time that you turn over the bundles, you have to do shmira. That's right from the beginning. So according to Rava, those matzahs were no good. They could say the night letters, but not thing. Ba'abwei Ravina. We need to shmir from beginning to end. The top of Mem Amud Beis. The top of Mem Amud Beis. She would gather the grains in a bowl all the way from the beginning, from the harvesting. So you see that you have to have shmira from the beginning. So you've got a big machloek to sheni where we pass like this gemara, and those we do hold. That it's what's the word for it? Those that say that you have to do shmira from the beginning, so therefore they would have to pay for the extra for what's the word for the shmira matzah. The Rosh himself thinks a shayla about it as to whether you have to. Right. So nowadays, as far as I'm aware, the difference in price is so small that it is kedai just to buy yourself the shmira matzah. I don't think they even make non-shmira matzah because everything's come from and therefore what happens is it's become like the normal type of shmira. Okay. Ahu Alba the Chiti. There was a ship full of grain. The Tova. It sank by Chishto in a river called Chishto. Shaya Robert is one of the Nochim. Robert allowed you to sell it to a goy. Not to a yid, because it might be chometz, but to a goy. Eisvei Rabba Balivoye the Robert. Begesh Ovad be Kilaim, a piece of clothing that's got Kilaim inside it, but you don't know what the Kilaim is. Hazelim Krenol Nochi, not allowed to sell it to a goy. You mustn't make it a saddle for a donkey. Why can't you make it a saddle for a donkey opposed of Kilan? Does anybody know? So the Rishonim say like this, that you're sitting on it, it's like carpet, and carpet you don't have to check for Kilan. Oh, this is a big shine. So I want to say two short stories. Let's just finish up with this. I tell you two very interesting stories. One which I heard personally from Khan Carpenter and say something about himself. This is like this. But Emma says there's nothing wrong with having a saddle made out of Kilan. Because a saddle is hard. Since a saddle is hard, therefore you get no warmth from it. It's like a plastic chair. Saddle is like a thing. There's no problem. The reason is like this, that the saddle might get tattered. So you pull off the cloth off the saddle and add it to your shirt or your jumper. And then it'll be kilaim. And you won't know about the kilaim because the kilaim was lost inside it. That's what Tosfos says. Top Tosfos. That's the same problem with selling it to a goy. You sell it to a goy, he'll then forget that it's got kilaim, and he'll sell it on to Yid. So therefore, you can't use it for that, right? So therefore, look at Tosfos. Oimeri, the dafim kilaim avodim osasam das. Shemi yasenu tlaya big to use as a patch for your clothes. But it's not a shigul soy. Avi kilaim you do shoy. V'adas achamoy ein bo mishum kilaim u'mutar lasim kava keses. You're allowed to make yourself a chair from kilaim. I just say two very short stories. One is a very famous story, it's the Stipler. The Chazon Ish read the Shikol Torah from the Stipler. He was so inspired, he decided that he should marry his sister. He told his sister, I've got a wonderful bocha for you. He sent a message to the Stipler, come and meet my sister. And the first meeting afterwards, said the Chazon Ish said to his sister, do you like him? She said, no. So why not? He fell asleep. Why did he fall asleep? Because what happened was he called him in and said to him, what happened was like this, I reckon I learn all day and I'll sleep on the train when I'm traveling to meet her. When I got into the train, what happened was there was cloth chairs, and I was choshesh for kilayim because it was soft and you sink inside it. So if I stood, so by the time I got to meet her, I was exhausted and I fell asleep. So the Chazon Ish pushed the sister to meet again, and they met again, and they had a son called Chaim Kanievsky amongst other children. But You see that sometimes it's worthwhile to go out on a second date. Well, the Beis, so that's one story. It's an unbelievable story. It's an unbelievable story. You see the gadlus of the Steinberg. One of us, Chaim Kaffer, told me the story himself. He once decided to buy himself new mattresses. And he decided to buy, there was a Yid that advertised, buy from me every chumrah that there is, that will be. Right? He bought it. And then he finds that the buttons which were underneath the mattress, I don't know why mattresses have buttons, it's like to keep it compressed, were sewn on with shatnez. So he took him to dinner, or he took to the Rav Selam, so I tell you, we pass him, that's okay. So the fact that there's a shitta that holds us no good, you can't say it's mekachtos. So that's what he told us. I said to him, if he advertised it as every chumrah, this is not every chumrah. So he said to me, I was telling you the story to get you excited, I dramatized it. He said it's kosher. Somebody advertised himself as not only is, like imagine you've got a Yiddish person, he sells you, I'm selling you mattresses which are kosher. He was very disappointed. So I said to him, so what did you do? What did the Rav Shir do with them? And he wouldn't tell me. But the Beis says it's important to halacha that you're not allowed to put kilah. Oh, what do you say? Oh, that's right. You see, it's very good. You're allowed to make it tachrichin made out of kilah. You're allowed to make tachrichin from kilah. I'll tell you what it is. There is a story, I heard this many times. It's a very good story. I heard it from the son of the person that happened. So I used to live in the Kilo, back to Shor Zaks. He was a grandson of Chafetz Chaim, big biscuit Talmud Chacham. And he had this daughter of the Chafetz Chaim staying by him. Can you imagine? Daughter of the Chafetz Chaim staying by him. His mother was the daughter of Chafetz Chaim. She lived to be, Chafetz Chaim got married the second time in his very, very old age. He got married and he was in the 70s. He had children in the 70s. Can you imagine? So for those children were not nifted, one of his daughters was not nifted that long ago. And one time she saw him buying esrog after esrog after esrog. She said, I don't know what you're doing. My father, Chafetz Chaim, never had more than one esrog. So he opened up his cupboard and said, how many shirts does Chafetz Chaim have? And how many shirts do I have? The reality is nowadays people want to have the best of everything, the best foods, the newest gadgets, the best car, the best chairs, the best couches. So if a person wants to have, at least you should have the best chumras. It goes together. You can't say I want the best of everything.
Isn't it a brisker thing to buy one of each?
Esrog, that's right. He used to buy 20, 30 esrog, at least. He spent all that on buying esrog. Anyway, but this is a fascinating twist. I'll tell you a sweet story about it. And they shake it every day. You know Yakishar Sachs?
I think it was him.
No, short, very short beard. They didn't work properly. Oh. Okay, so the Beis, where? Which school? It's a very interesting thing. The halacha is you're allowed to make shatnez to a person who's not alive. You lose it out to his tachich. Fake taste. What's the obvious question? What's the obvious question? That when you go to a Beis Yisroel, what's the first thing that you do? Tucking your tzitzis, loig lavosh. So why is it by tzitzis will we so machmer, and yet we put on them kilayim? This is discussion.
It's them up to it, not us.
Listen, you put a kilayim on him, we can follow him that he doesn't need to keep the mitzvahs, and you do, and you don't put the kilayim on yourself.
Yeah, he can't keep them.
I don't know. Okay. So Teres gives two answers. One answer is that tzitzis is a very, very special mitzvah. Shokak leget kolater. And another says it's more complicated. It's like this: that kilayim, when the person benefits from the clothes, then he has to make sure it's not kilayim. We once learned that if somebody's selling kilayim, he's allowed to wear it till he sells it. He's allowed to try on a piece of clothing. He's not benefiting. He's not doing it for warmth. And that person doesn't get the warmth of the clothes. He's not actually having kilayim. Again, tzitzis has nothing to do with the warmth. Tzitzis is the mitzvah to wear tzitzis. So kilayim and mace is actually potter. It'd be like somebody wearing, like we said, somebody selling his clothes is allowed to wear kilayim. So too, somebody said for his part, Mashiach tzitzis. Now, Teres finishes off a very interesting thing. Teres says, "Lemaisa, that the Gemara in Nochas tells us, it's just this over here says that you should a mace should put on tzitzis. You should put on tzitzis on dead person. But there's a Maseches Seifim that you shouldn't put on tzitzis on a mace. And Teres finishes off that there's a few times in Shas where we ignore Talmud Bavli and rely on a brisa even though it's not mentioned in our Gemara. Teres says there's a famous story of Vilna Gaon, if you ever read the biography of Vilna Gaon, that he decided that he doesn't want to follow the Tosfos, and he asked them to put tzitzis on his clothes, and the Chevra Kadisha were very, very worried about it, they didn't know what to do, but they were too scared to go against his wishes. They put on tzitzis, and as they were burying him, the tzitzis got caught on the thorns and snapped. So they were relieved. If you look at this, there's a few occasions that we don't follow our Gemara. For example, and after or the leaning on the Tanis is Vayechal. The Gemara in Tanis says that we learn Parshas Bechukoisai. Another thing is that was Chodesh, which is a Shabbos, we learn the Chazon Yeshaya, and the Gemara says you learn. The Gemara says you learn Chazon Yeshaya, and we learn Ashmaim Kissi V'Al Tzei Magri. Chodesh last book in Yeshaya. It's a very very ancient thesis over here. If you look at the thesis. ומה שמשים על זה התהליסה שמייסים סיוך נעוד דתיים מסך הסמוכס אבא שוב ונדס רבנם גבוהות תחת הגריש ואבא והציעו את חס בפלונם כמה דברים נסיך הספורם חיצוניים ומניחים גמור שלנו. There's a few places we leave our Gemara. So I want to say very briefly, there was a rabbi in Bnei Brak, very serious person. Once said to me, do you want to hear something funny? Which for me was interesting to hear because it was particularly serious. I couldn't imagine what kind of... Anyway, he said to me that he decided to treat his son to a very special treat, his 8-year-old son, to take him to Meron. Which is a very, son was beyond excited for Shumba Yechai's cave. As they walk into the cave, his son said to his father, we better tuck it out tzitzis because of Loig Larosh. And his father thought that was the most hilarious thing he'd ever heard. He said, Shumba Yechai wrote the whole Zoya. Every Daf and Gemara mentions him. And my 8-year-old, he said, thinks to himself that by me wearing tzitzis, Shumba Yechai will be hurt because I'm more special than him. He was very insecure how great his son was. That his son realized, end of the day, Shimon Chai is very great. He wrote the Zohar, and it's hardly a Gemara without Shimon. At the end of the day, he can't wear tzitzis, and I can. It's not fair to him. So you have to be sympathetic to Shimon Chai and hide your tzitzis. It was very sweet. Okay. So the Ma'aseh Halacha is, let's get back to the basic points. We learned like this: kilaim. Are you allowed to put kilaim on the saddle? What's the halacha?
No.
I was hoping you would say yes. Yes, except if you don't know where the kilaim is, and then one day then the saddle will get tattered and you lose it as a patch. Then theoretically, that's what Teresa says. If you know where the kilaim is, it's the only problem is because you might wear it as a patch afterwards. Are you allowed to put kilaim on a dead person?
Yeah.
Yes. What about Loig Lavosh? That's only by tzitzis and only because here is not getting a no. But my time alone. Why can't you sell kilaim to a goy? You'll sell it eventually to Yid. So if you're going to sell it to Yid, you can see it's no good. So how can you sell wheat which fell into the river to a goy? The goy will then take the wheat, and what will he do with it? Sell it on to a Yid.
No, because most of them want to buy it.
Why not? They'll buy a grave. They don't know that it fell into a river.
Yeah, but people are more careful usually.
Where would you buy your grain from?
I wouldn't.
So Adam Awavel is vinu kabel Yisroel. You should sell it bit by bit to Yidden Kechti Kale Kabel Pesach in order that it should be finished before Pesach. Okay. Got a bit more Pesach. You mustn't add flour to your soup or ingredients to thicken it. Many things are thickened with flour. It's amazing how many things are thickened with flour. Not how to do Pesach. But if you want to do it, you put in flour, and then you put in vinegar. Why? Because putting in vinegar stops it from getting chometz. Some say you can add the vinegar first and then the chometz, then the flour. Because they hold that the vinegar is so powerful that even if you put in the flour later, it still will stop it coming chometz. If you take a pot off the flame on Shabbos, so what is it when you take it off the flame? Not allowed to add spices to it, right? But if you pour from the cholent pot into a bowl, then you're allowed to add spices into the bowl because kelishini, and kelishini is not mavashal, except for kali abishal. Most things kelishini is not mavashal. If it's got vinegar inside the bowl, then you can't add spices because vinegar has the ability to create a sharpening and change things, even though it's got only a little bit of vinegar. So we see over here that if you add vinegar to something and then afterwards add the flour, it will not become chometz because vinegar has the ability to affect the entire tavshil and it will not become chometz. So earlier we said that if a person's got grain and he's scared about chometz, we did it about just a half an hour ago, then what should you do? Put them in vinegar, and vinegar contracts them. They will talk about we put the vinegar directly onto the grain. Through a mixture, not. That means through a mixture over here, you've got a pot, you add vinegar, and then afterwards you add the grain and then flour. Since by the time you add the flour, the vinegar has already become dissolved in the other part of the pot, So therefore, by adding the flour, it will become chametz. Therefore, it's no good. Ula says, also, you're never allowed to add flour on Pesach to a pot. We're talking about normal flour. Can you imagine such a thing happening nowadays? Would like a woman would faint for such a thing. To go into your kitchen and having, let's say, a bit of chicken soup, a bit of cholent, and just pouring in plain flour in order to thicken it. So Ula says it's awesome. That's how we pass it. It's an expression, which is when we tell a Nazi, don't go anywhere near a vineyard. Why shouldn't you go anywhere near a vineyard? Because it goes near a vineyard, might eat the grapes. So too, there's a concept that we try our best to avoid problems. Therefore, we do not add flour to any pot, even if there's vinegar inside it. He allowed the bakers in Reish Gelusa, the house of Reish Gelusa, to thicken their pot with dried grain flour. That means you dry the grain and crush it and use the flour. The people in the Reish Gelusa are slaves, meaning they're not people who know the halachas. You allow them to do this, they'll come to do worse things. So if in such a household, I would forbidden it. Some say the Rabbi himself used dried grain and thickened the soup. So I've got machlokes whether the Rabbi was against it or whether the Rabbi was for it. But as we mentioned already, that Ula himself says that it's all forbidden because of a gezer d'Rabbanan, you might come to do something worse. Okay. Says the Gemara. It says Mishnah. On Pesach, you've got a dip. Chavosis or challah is mustard. Chavosis is not the chavosis which we were talking about Seder night. In fact, the word chavosis just means a dip. Now, saying that we have a certain kind of dip. Let's say you've got a dip like chvein or mustard on Pesach, and you want to add a little bit of flour. Why not? Because even though by water it takes 18 minutes, these things go quicker. And if you're not allowed to add a bit of flour into your mustard or chavosis. If you did, you've got to eat it straight away. There shouldn't come chametz. Rameir forbids you to eat it straight away. Why? Rameir holds that vinegar has the power to create such chametz that even if you eat it immediately, it might already be chametz. And again, here we have this problem that I know. That's what I said. No, when it is already in the process of chametz, it delays it. But when it's not chametz at all, you put in vinegar, then it has the ability to create chametz. You're not allowed to cook the Korban Pesach. How did we eat the Korban Pesach? Roasted. So can you cook it in the pot? No. Now the big problem with this mission, the biggest problem, Teresa actually asks the question, so I don't know the answer, is what in the world is this mission doing over here? In fact, we're going to have a whole parak about how to roast Korban Pesach. And for the next 2 Pesachim, we're going to carry on discussing chametz and things like that. How did it suddenly come in? Cooking your Korban Pesach.
Making foods.
Oh,
we're talking about liquids.
Mama Chalava says it. He says more. If we talk about dips, and if we might have thought that this is a dip, and therefore it's very strange. It's a bit difficult. The Mishnah says you're not allowed to cook Korban Pesach, not in water, and not in orange juice, and not in any drinks at all. Avol, sochin umakbilinoisi ben. What you could do is, while it's on the fire, sometimes what they used to do is, in order to roast well, you would pour on the meat on the fire. If you ever make a grill, so you drop the liquid in order it should burn well. So that's okay. That's not called bishul, that's called roasted. And furthermore, you can dip the Korban Pesach after it's roasted in a liquid and eat it, because that's not called cooking. That means during the cooking process, you can't put it in a pot and add water and orange juice and all the rest of it to cook. But while it's on the fire, you're allowed to smear it with the liquids, and afterwards you're allowed to dip it in and eat it. Okay. A baker who bakes on Pesach and is finished with all the bakings, he's got water left over. Yishbechu, you have to pour it out. That means like this. Let's say a baker. Those days, the baker's hands get very, very hot. I don't know. When I saw the Ran later, different Gemara says, because it's not like nowadays where one person kneads the flour and another person puts the matzahs in the oven. In those days, it was one person did the whole process. So when you would put the matzahs in the oven, his hands would get very hot. So he would dip his hands the whole time in cold water. After it's finished, what should you do with that cold water? It says the Mishnah, he has to pour it out somewhere where people won't get to it. Why? Because it's going to be chametz, because it's got flour residue on it. So if you have to pour it out. Now, in our Mishnah, we talk about 2 things. Putting flour into mustard, putting flour into chavosas. The Tanakama holds that if you did it, you shouldn't do it. But if you did do it, what should you do? Eat it quickly. Amir says, don't eat it quickly. Rather destroy it. By must after chavoisas, which is even sharper. Everybody agrees you have to put it immediately because of chametz. Everybody agrees that chavoisas become chametz immediately. Everybody agrees to put it straight away. Okay. So it's like this. It's got quite a lot of different explanations. If are you allowed to put flour into mustard or into chavisas? No, you're not allowed to. Everybody agrees you're not allowed to. If you did, according to Amir, what's the din? Destroy it straight away. According to the Chachamim, they say you can eat it straight away. But even according to the Chachamim, you can eat it straight away. It depends what. If it's chaldan, you can eat it. Chavisas, you can't. We'll see later so he argues on that. Let's just see. Omar Avuna Vedu Avishuv Yehuda, Omar Nachman, Omar Shmuel, Aloch Ktiv Chachamim pass like the Chachamim. Omar Nachman Yitzchak Avuna Vedu Yehuda, top of the Malach from the Malach. Achavisas come out, Echad come out. Means the explanation is like this. Did you say this? He paskan that what? Like the Chachamim. Are you allowed to eat it? Did you mean by chavoisas and chaldan, or just chavoisas and not just chaldan or chavoisas? Meaning, but that was an Amora. This is a different Amora. This Amora doesn't necessarily have to agree with him. Teresis asks the question, what do you mean? We had a Beis that says like this Amora. So he says that we understood that our Mishnah that doesn't seem to say that. Because if you read the simple translation of our Mishnah is, they're arguing both by chavoisas and by chaldan. So therefore it's more mistaber to say that the Chachamim agree that by both of them about it. You ask me regard to Rav Kahana, that you ask me according to Rav Kahana, because according to Rav Kahana by Chavosis, everything you have to be on it. I've never heard it because I don't agree with it. Whenever somebody wants to say I really don't agree with something, instead of just saying I don't agree, you say I've never heard of it. I've never heard of it is even a bigger rejection of I don't agree with it. I've never even heard of such a thing. So the point is, he says like this, that it comes out now, if somebody would say to you, what's the halacha by chavosis l'chad, then you've got a four-way focus. You're never allowed to put it in. If you put it in according to Amir, you always have to destroy it. According to the Chachamim, you're allowed to eat it. According to the Chachamim that you're allowed to eat it, you have a machlokas. Did they say you're allowed to eat it by both chavosis and chalda? Or did you say you're not allowed to eat it? You're allowed to eat it only by chalda, but by chavosis they agree you're not allowed to eat it. Friday is always a bit short. I'd like to do a little bit more. Says the Gemara, I agree with Rav Kahana that what? That by chavoisas it's no good. If you remember, we learned that if somebody's got grain and they're about to become chametz, Rav Yossi says stick them in vinegar. And by sticking them in vinegar, they will not become chametz. And Rav Shmuel came along and said that we don't agree with Rabbi Yossi, that vinegar does not help. It does not contract, like because it doesn't hold to Rabbi Yossi, that doesn't contract. He understood like this. If we're saying not like Rabbi Yossi, meaning that vinegar doesn't have the ability to contract it and stop it becoming chametz, so he obviously held that vinegar is more liable to create chametz than to stop chametz. If that's the case, it makes sense that Shmuel, because it's the same person, it's the same Shmuel, both were speaking the name of Shmuel, right? You look over here. Shmuel, and he was speaking, and he was so it says like this. Therefore, Rav Kahana was saying that mistaber that from Shmuel himself, that in halacha Rabbi Yossi, that he also holds like Rav Kahana's statement in his name that what? That Rav Kahana's statement, sorry, that was his name. Rav Kahana's statement on the same basis that sharp things don't contract, but rather they create chametz. Says one, look, maybe Shmuel held that vinegar doesn't do either. It doesn't contract it, and it doesn't create chametz, and therefore you've got no raya. So the Maisa have got no raya, and therefore the Maisa, I said the way we pass that you're not allowed to eat it anyway. We're machmir about it. So the Maisa, if a person has flour, puts flour into a dip, he has to destroy it, he can't eat it. Because even though we said many times 18 minutes, not we said here, but even though everybody knows, children know 18 minutes for chametz, that is only in normal ingredients. When it comes to something sharp and vinegarish, it's actually much shorter than 18 minutes. I'd like to do a little bit more because, does anybody mind? No, okay, we're going now to the halachas of Korban Pesach for a daf. That means we're going to be learning the halachas of Korban Pesach. The Torah says two psukim. The two psukim are actually a little bit repetitive. The first pasuk says, "V'ochlu sabosa b'layla aseh." You should eat it tzliesh, roasted. U'matzah samoyim yechlu u'matzah. Next pasuk says, "Al teichlu menu no." What does the word no mean? No means half cooked, half raw. U'bashim avushim b'mayim. Mustn't eat it cooked either. Ki'im tzliesh, only roasted, which means the Torah tells us twice to eat it roasted. Once says just stam, just says eat it roasted, and then it says don't eat it raw cooked, only roasted. It says what? You might have thought you're only not allowed to cook it in water. What happens if I want to cook it not in water, in oil? Am I allowed to cook it? Almost kavachima. I tell you kavachima. Water doesn't take away the taste of the Korban Pesach. So nevertheless it's forbidden. Shamashkin, other liquids from a figan tamon that take away the taste. Lekoshkin is not a kavachima that you can't. There are two droshes. Both of them agree to the same halacha. The Torah says vashim mevushal b'mayim. That you're not allowed to eat Korban Pesach cooked in water. It's actually two separate halachas. One is you're not allowed to cook it, and second of all, if you did cook it, you're not allowed to eat it. Two separate halachas. So the Torah says two halachas: you're not allowed to cook it in water, and if you did, you're not allowed to eat it. Now, the Torah mentions water. What about if you want to cook it and that's in orange juice? Mutter osa. So both Tanakama and Rebbe both say it's osa, but they learn it out from two separate places. They're not arguing in halacha yet. They're only arguing in Makor, in the source. What's the Tanakama learn? How does he know you're not allowed to cook it in orange juice? What's kavachima? Right, kavachima orange juice takes away the taste. And Rebbe learns it from Boshim Mevushal. Why I have to say it twice? Boshim Mevushal. Just say Boshim Mevushal. Why is it Boshim Mevushal? The extra word to tell you that even if it's cooked in anything, it is awesome. It says more. My benai. What's the nafkamina? If they're both agreeing in halachas, what is nafkamina? And it says more. Ike benayut slikedo, a pot roast. Kedo means a pot. A pot roast, literally a pot roast. A pot roast, what you do is like this. You take a pot, you don't add any liquids. You put the meat inside, you put it on the fire. Now, according to the Chachamim, you've got no reason to say it's awesome. It's not water. It's not other liquids. So therefore it should be mutter. And you can't say kavachima from water, it's worse than water. On the contrary, it's better than water. Because water, you've added something. Here, the only thing it's being cooked in is its own juices. Ashek, according to Rebbe, that says vashim mevushal, any form of vishal is asa, so this is also asa. Now we the Ma'aseh are not allowed to do a pot roast, but the only way to roast Korban Pesach is on a spit. But in Ma'aseh, it's actually a machrikas tanoim if you're allowed to have a pot roast Korban Pesach. Says the Gemara, so what would they do with the extra word bash mevushal? That even if you just cook it and then roast it, or roast and then cook it, it is awesome. You might have thought that only the Torah says roast it. If you cook it after the roasting, before the roasting, it's okay. No. That even, and this comes out actually a Shaila Gabe Shabbos as well. Let's say you've got, I remember years ago, we started discussing about soup croutons. Soup croutons are fried. If they're fried, that could be a form of tzli. Or baking. If someone baked or someone fried, and they're not fried, okay, it's all baked. If then afterwards you put it, let's say, into hot chicken soup, let's say it's keli sheni and mechoshesh keli shemivashom, so can you do it? Because it's bishul achatzli or bishul achafir. This is big shaila. So the Gemara says that even though Gabi Shabbos, we'll discuss another time, the Gabi Korban Pesach, it is clearly no good. How do you know it's no good, Gabi Korban Pesach? Because vashim mevushal, extra word. Says the Gemara, bishlo v'akach tzolei chayev do bishlo, you baked it, you cooked it, and at tzolei v'akach bishlo. Oh, tzlieshu, amai. So what's wrong? You roasted it first. Well, who cares that you cooked it? If you take a matzah which is baked and then you cook it, according to Rameir, it's good enough. It's okay if it's soaked. Even if it's not been soaked. Have machlekes regarding matzah on Pesach, which was baked. And then afterwards you cooked it, machlekes tanoim, if you can use it on matzah seder. Says the Gemara, that same machlekes, whether you can use matzah on Pesach, which was baked and then cooked, is the same shaila regarding the korban Pesach, which was roasted and then cooked. Says, well, no. Since the Torah uses an extra word, it's always also. Let's go. We're going to stop over here. I just want to summarize. We're going to stop here. It comes out like this. What to use the word Boshim Avosha. According to Rebbe, Boshim Avosha teaches you what? What's Rebbe use? Or any liquids. Mine the Torah says any liquids, even pot roast, which is his own juices. The Chachamim don't use Boshim Avosha for that. They use Boshim Avosha for what? Bishul Achatzliya. Very good. How do the Chachamim know you're not allowed to cook it in other juices other than water? Regarding matzah, there's a machlekes whether cooked matzah is okay or not. Machlekes of Meir and Beis. So Meir says it's no good. Beis says it's okay. Sorry, it's not around. And Meir says it is okay. Beis says it's no good. The Gemara's got two malachim. One malach is it's the same machlekes by matzah, it's the same shaila by korban Pesach. And the malach is you can't compare. By korban Pesach says Boshim Avosha. By matzah doesn't say that, so therefore you can't compare matzah to korban Pesach. Okay. Very good. Shkech. Some water, man. Very good. That's not good. Motzei Shabbos, we're going to have a short lechaim. It's actually a very, very long peruk. So
He's bringing the food.
it was a very long peruk. It was like 20 chapters.
Come on, no, I've done mine. I'm done.